The camera flashes erupted like lightning in a storm as I stood at the altar, watching 300 wedding guests slowly realize what Diane Blackwood had done to me. My wedding dress, the vintage Vera Wang masterpiece I had saved for 2 years to buy, was gone. In its place hung a cheap knockoff that looked like it came from a discount bridal warehouse, complete with uneven hem, poorly sewn beadwork, and fabric that caught the light in all the wrong ways. Oh my God, I heard someone whisper from the third row, "What happened to her dress?" The photographer kept clicking away, capturing what would become the most viral wedding disaster photos of the year. My fiancé Tyler stood beside me, his face cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and something that looked dangerously close to shame. His mother, Diane, sat in the front row wearing a satisfied smile that she probably thought looked sympathetic. But here's what none of them knew. I had been expecting this moment for exactly 6 weeks. The officiant, clearly sensing the tension, cleared his throat and began the ceremony with forced enthusiasm. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Tyler and Emma in holy matrimony. I smiled serenely, my hands steady as I held Tyler's trembling fingers. The whispers grew louder behind us, phones appearing as guests began documenting what they assumed was an unfortunate accident. I could feel their pity washing over me in waves, their second-hand embarrassment at my apparent humiliation. Poor Emma, their faces seemed to say. Her wedding dress is ruined, and she doesn't even know how ridiculous she looks. If only they understood that I had chosen this dress myself, not the original one, that was safely hidden in my best friend's closet. But this cheap imitation that Diane had so carefully selected to humiliate me, I had anticipated it perfectly. Emma, the officiant continued, do you take Tyler to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? I do, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the cathedral without a tremor. Behind Tyler, I could see his groomsmen exchanging concerned glances. They had seen my real dress during the rehearsal dinner. They knew something was wrong. The ceremony continued, each moment captured by increasingly frantic photographers who seemed torn between professional duty and human decency. Should they keep documenting this disaster? Should they pretend nothing was wrong? Their confusion was almost as entertaining as Diane's growing satisfaction. When Tyler kissed me at the altar, sealing our marriage with lips that tasted like anxiety and regret, the flash photography reached its crescendo. These photos would indeed go viral, just as I had planned, but not for the reason Diane intended. As we walked back down the aisle together, I caught sight of my phone, discreetly held by my maid of honor, already lighting up with notifications. The photos were uploading to social media in real time, tagged with our wedding hashtag and location. By the time we reached the reception, the story would have spread far beyond our guest list. Emma, Tyler whispered, as we posed for formal photos outside the cathedral, what happened to your dress? That's not the one from yesterday. I looked at him with the same serene smile I had worn all day. Your mother wanted to surprise me with something more suitable for the Blackwood family. Wasn't that thoughtful? His face paled as the implication hit him. Behind us, I could hear Diane explaining to confused relatives that there had been a little mix-up with the dresses. Nothing to worry about. These things happen at weddings. But the photographer kept clicking. And the phones kept recording, and the internet kept spreading the images of what appeared to be a bride humiliated on her wedding day by a catastrophic dress disaster. Mrs. Blackwood, the photographer said to me, apparently unaware of the irony, should we perhaps postpone the formal shots until we can address the dress situation? This is my dress, I replied smoothly. There's nothing to address. I could feel Tyler's hand tighten on my arm, his confusion growing by the minute. He was beginning to understand that something much more complex was happening here than a simple wardrobe malfunction. The reception was held at the Blackwood family's country club, a place where appearances mattered more than substance, and where Diane reigned supreme as the queen of social manipulation. She had planned every detail of this wedding to reflect the Blackwood family's status. From the 12-course meal to the string quartet to the 5-tier cake that cost more than most people's cars. But she had also planned my humiliation with the same meticulous attention to detail. As we entered the reception hall, I could see the guests clustering in small groups, phones in hand, sharing photos and theories about what had gone wrong. The hashtag Blackwood Wedding Disaster was already trending on Twitter, accompanied by photos of me in what everyone assumed was a catastrophically wrong dress. "Emma, darling," Diane approached me with arms outstretched and a voice dripping with false concern. "I am so sorry about the confusion with your dress. The delivery service must have mixed up the orders. But you look lovely anyway, dear." I embraced her warmly, noting how her body tensed when I whispered in her ear, "Thank you for making this day so memorable, Diane. I'll never forget what you've done for me." When I pulled back, her eyes searched my face for signs of the devastation she had expected to find. Instead, she saw only gratitude and calm acceptance. It was clearly not the reaction she had hoped for. "The important thing," I announced to the gathered crowd, "is that Tyler and I are married. Everything else is just details." The applause that followed was polite but uncertain. These people had come expecting to witness a fairy tale wedding, not a social media disaster. They didn't know whether to congratulate us or offer condolences. But I knew exactly what I was doing. Every smile, every gracious response, every moment of apparent obliviousness was carefully calculated. Because while everyone was focused on my dress, they were missing the much bigger story that was about to unfold. Tyler pulled me aside during the cocktail hour, his face tight with worry and confusion. "Emma, we need to talk. Something's not right here. My mother, she wouldn't what?" I asked innocently. "Switch out my wedding dress to humiliate me in front of 300 people? Make me look like a fool on the most important day of my life? Destroy photos that I'll have to look at for the rest of our marriage?" His silence was answer enough. "Tyler," I said gently, "your mother has made her feelings about me very clear over the past 2 years. This is just her final statement before we become family. I'll talk to her. I'll make her explain what happened. This is unacceptable." I placed my hand on his arm, stopping him before he could storm over to where Diane was holding court with the other society matrons. "Don't. Not tonight. Let's just enjoy our wedding." But even as I spoke those words, I could feel my phone buzzing with notifications. The photos were spreading faster than I had even hoped, shared and reshared across social platforms with commentary that was growing more outraged by the hour. "Can you believe what this mother-in-law did to her son's bride? This is the most evil thing I've ever seen at a wedding. Someone needs to expose this woman for the monster she is." By the time we cut the cake, hashtag Diane Blackwood Wedding Shame was trending nationally, and the story had been picked up by 3 major news outlets. The photos of me in my deliberately chosen fake dress were being shared with commentary that painted Diane as the villain of what was quickly becoming the wedding scandal of the year. And through it all, I smiled and thanked guests for coming, posed for photos with gracious dignity, and played the role of the sweet bride, who was too kind to blame anyone for what had obviously been a devastating betrayal. Because I knew something that none of them did. This was exactly what I had planned for Diane Blackwood, and we were only getting started. 6 weeks earlier, I had been standing in my tiny apartment bedroom, carefully photographing my real wedding dress from every angle. The Vera Wang was a work of art. Ivory silk crepe with hand-sewn pearl details, a cathedral train that flowed like water, and a bodice that fit me like it had been designed specifically for my body. It had taken me 2 years of saving, months of searching vintage collections, and 3 fittings to make it perfect. I uploaded the photos to a secure cloud folder, time-stamped and tagged with detailed notes about the dress's provenance, cost, and significance. Then I wrapped it carefully in acid-free tissue paper and drove it to my best friend Chloe's apartment. "Emma, what's going on?" Chloe asked, as I hung the dress in her bedroom closet. "Your wedding is in 6 weeks. Why are you hiding your dress at my place?" I sat down on her bed and pulled out my phone, showing her the series of text messages I had discovered between Tyler and his mother 3 days earlier. He had left his phone unlocked while showering, and years of dating a Blackwood had taught me to pay attention when opportunities for information presented themselves. Diane, have you seen Emma's dress choice for the wedding? Tyler, she looks beautiful in it. Why, Diane? It's completely inappropriate for our family's social standing. Very flashy and attention-seeking, not at all suitable for a Blackwood bride. Tyler, Mom, it's her wedding dress. She loves it. Diane, that's exactly the problem, sweetheart. Emma has always had common tastes. Perhaps we can arrange for something more appropriate to be delivered instead. Tyler, what do you mean? Let me handle this. Trust your mother to know what's best for the family reputation. Chloe read through the messages twice, her expression darkening with each text. Emma, you have to confront her about this. You can't let her sabotage your wedding dress. I'm not going to confront her, I said calmly, taking my phone back. I'm going to let her do exactly what she's planning to do. Are you insane? She's going to ruin your wedding. No, I replied, pulling up a new browser window on my laptop. She's going to ruin herself. I had known Diane Blackwood for 2 years, ever since Tyler first brought me home to meet his family. She was the kind of woman who smiled sweetly while delivering calculated insults, who remembered every social slight and stored them up for future ammunition, who treated family dynamics like a chess game where she always had to win. From our first meeting, when she had looked me up and down and commented that Tyler's friends were always so interesting, I had understood that she saw me as a threat to her son's social status. I wasn't from the right family, didn't have the right education, didn't move in the right circles. I was the girl who worked 2 jobs to pay for community college, not the debutante she had envisioned for her precious son. But what Diane didn't understand was that growing up working class had taught me skills that her privileged upbringing never could. I knew how to research, how to plan, how to document everything, and how to turn someone's own weapons against them. Chloe, I need you to help me find the perfect backup dress, I said, opening a new shopping tab. Something that looks exactly like what Diane would choose for me. Cheap, unflattering, and obviously fake. Emma, this is crazy. Why would you want to look bad at your own wedding? Because sometimes you have to lose a battle to win a war. I spent the next week researching Diane's patterns of behavior, documenting every slight, every backhanded compliment, every attempt to undermine my relationship with Tyler. I saved screenshots of her social media posts about appropriate behavior for women, her comments about family values and social responsibility, her carefully curated image as the perfect society matron. Then I began setting up my digital infrastructure. I created a professional website called The Real Story Behind Viral Wedding Photos, designed to look like a legitimate journalism project. I registered social media accounts across all major platforms, built a network of friends and allies who agreed to help amplify the story when the time came, and even reached out to a few wedding bloggers who specialized in exposing bridal industry drama. This is incredibly elaborate, Chloe observed as she watched me work on a detailed timeline of Diane's manipulative behavior. Are you sure she's actually going to switch your dress? Oh, she's going to switch it, I said confidently. Diane never makes empty threats. She's probably already found the replacement dress and figured out how to make the switch without Tyler knowing. I was right. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a call from the bridal shop where I had bought my dress. Miss Torres, this is Beverly from Elegant Bridal. We've received some confusing instructions regarding your dress pickup. Mrs. Blackwood called yesterday claiming there had been a change to your order, but our records show that you've already paid in full and confirmed all the details. What kind of change? I asked, though I already knew. She wanted to substitute a different dress entirely. When we explained that wasn't possible without your authorization, she became quite insistent. She claimed there had been a family emergency that required a different style. Thank you for calling me, Beverly. Please don't make any changes to my order without my direct, written authorization. Of course, Miss Torres, but I should mention, Mrs. Blackwood seemed very confident that she had the authority to make changes. She mentioned something about family traditions and appropriate choices for Blackwood brides. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the bridal shop for 20 minutes, feeling a familiar burn of anger mixed with determination. Diane was escalating her campaign, probably assuming that I would be too intimidated or too focused on wedding planning to fight back effectively. She had no idea that I had been preparing for this exact scenario for weeks. That evening, I called Tyler and told him I wanted to keep my dress at the venue overnight before the wedding, to ensure nothing happened to it during transport. He thought it was sweet that I was being so careful with something so important to me. What I actually did was deliver the cheap knockoff dress I had ordered online, a $200 imitation of my real dress that looked convincing in photos but would clearly appear fake and poorly made in person. I hung it in the bridal suite at the venue, knowing that Diane would find a way to access it the night before the wedding. Then I set up 3 hidden cameras in the bridal suite, positioned to capture anyone who entered the room without authorization. 2 days before the wedding, I received another call, this time from a different bridal shop across town. Miss Torres, this is Nancy from Blue Rose Bridal. Mrs. Blackwood placed an order yesterday for a rush delivery to your wedding venue. She said it was a surprise gift for you, but she insisted on having our most economical option. We wanted to confirm that this was authorized. Can you describe the dress she ordered? Well, it's quite different from what most brides choose. Very simple, not much detailing, and the construction is, let's say, it's designed for a very tight budget. Are you sure this is what you want for your wedding day? Yes, I said, barely containing my excitement. That's exactly what I want. The final piece of my preparation involved my photographer. I had hired Jackson Walsh, a talented professional who specialized in weddings but also did freelance work for celebrity gossip magazines. When I explained that there might be some unexpected drama at my wedding that would be worth documenting, he agreed to capture everything with the understanding that I might want to license some of the photos for editorial use. Emma, I have to ask, are you planning something that might get me in trouble legally? Nothing illegal, I assured him. But there might be a story worth telling after the fact. Just document everything truthfully, and we'll sort out the details later. The night before the wedding, I sat in my hotel room with Chloe, watching the live feed from the cameras I had hidden in the bridal suite. At 11:47 p.m., Diane appeared on screen, accompanied by a young man who was clearly a hotel employee. I just need to make a quick adjustment to my daughter-in-law's dress, she explained to him as he unlocked the door. Family tradition, you understand. For the next 20 minutes, the cameras captured Diane carefully removing my fake dress from its garment bag and replacing it with an even cheaper alternative. A dress so obviously low quality that it would have been embarrassing at a high school prom, let alone a society wedding. Perfect, I whispered, watching her smooth down the replacement dress with obvious satisfaction. Absolutely perfect. As Diane left the bridal suite, probably congratulating herself on executing the perfect humiliation, I was already uploading the footage to my secure servers and preparing the social media posts that would go live immediately after the ceremony. Chloe shook her head in amazement. Emma, you realize you're about to destroy your relationship with your mother-in-law forever? No, I corrected. I'm about to show everyone who Diane Blackwood really is. She destroyed our relationship the moment she decided to sabotage my wedding dress. What if Tyler doesn't support you when this all comes out? I considered her question seriously. Then I'll know I married the wrong man, but I don't think that's going to happen. Tyler loves me, and once he sees the evidence of what his mother has been doing, he'll understand why I had to respond this way. And if the internet decides you're the villain for planning such an elaborate revenge, then they clearly don't understand what it's like to have someone systematically try to destroy your dignity and your place in your own family. I spent my last night as an unmarried woman fine-tuning the website that would tell my story. scheduling social media posts to go live at precisely timed intervals, and preparing for what would either be the most satisfying day of my life or the most spectacular failure of my plan. But as I finally fell asleep, I felt a deep sense of calm. Whatever happened tomorrow, Diane Blackwood would finally face consequences for her behavior. And for the first time in 2 years, I would stop being the victim of her manipulations and start being the author of my own story. The wedding dress hanging in the venue's bridal suite was exactly what Diane had chosen for me: cheap, unflattering, and designed to humiliate. But the humiliation would not land where she intended it. Sometimes the best way to avoid a trap is to walk into it on purpose, with your own plans already in motion. The morning of my wedding, I woke up in my hotel room feeling more confident than I had in months. My phone showed dozens of notifications from friends and family sending well wishes for the big day, but none of them knew they were about to witness the most carefully orchestrated wedding revenge in social media history. I made myself coffee and sat by the window, watching the early morning activity at the venue across the street. Diane would probably arrive early to make sure her surprise was still in place, and I wanted to time my arrival perfectly to maintain the illusion that I had no idea what had happened to my dress. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Good morning, future wife. Can't wait to see you in your beautiful dress today. You're going to take everyone's breath away." I smiled at the irony. He was absolutely right. I was going to take everyone's breath away, just not in the way he expected. "Good morning, future husband. Today is going to be a day we'll never forget." Chloe arrived at 9 a.m. with coffee, bagels, and a suspicious expression. "Emma, I barely slept last night. Are you absolutely sure about this plan? Once those photos go viral, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," I said, showing her my phone screen. The hidden cameras had captured Diane returning to the bridal suite at 7 a.m., checking to make sure her substitute dress was still hanging in place. Look at that smile on her face. She thinks she's about to get away with the perfect crime. What if Tyler never forgives you for embarrassing his family? Tyler's going to see video footage of his mother breaking into the bridal suite to sabotage my wedding dress. If he's more upset about embarrassing her than about what she did to me, then I married the wrong person. I spent the morning getting my hair and makeup done, chatting with my bridesmaids, and posing for pre-ceremony photos in my hotel robe. Every moment was documented by Jackson, who had already begun setting up multiple camera angles at the venue to capture what he suspected would be an unusually newsworthy wedding. "Emma," my sister Anna said as she helped me into my undergarments, "I have to tell you something. I saw Mrs. Blackwood in the hotel lobby this morning, and she looked satisfied, like she was planning something. You might want to double-check your dress when we get to the venue." "Thanks for the warning," I said, maintaining my innocent bride facade. "I'm sure everything will be fine." At 11 a.m., we made our way to the venue for what appeared to be the standard pre-wedding preparations. My bridesmaids chatted excitedly about the ceremony, the flowers, and how beautiful everything looked. They had no idea they were about to be extras in the most viral wedding drama of the year. When I opened the door to the bridal suite and saw the cheap dress hanging where my real one should have been, I gave what I hoped was a convincing performance of shock and confusion. That's not my dress," I said slowly, staring at the obvious knockoff that Diane had so carefully selected. Anna gasped. "Emma, what happened? Where's your real dress?" "I don't understand," I said, examining the replacement dress with apparent bewilderment. "This looks like mine, but the fabric is different. The beading is wrong. The proportions are all off." Chloe, playing her part perfectly, pulled out her phone and called the bridal shop. "Beverly, it's Chloe Martinez, Emma's maid of honor. We're at the venue, and there seems to be some kind of mix-up with the dress." "What do you mean Mrs. Blackwood called yesterday?" "No, Emma definitely didn't authorize any changes. The confusion in the bridal suite was genuine, even if my shock was carefully performed." My bridesmaids began calling vendors, checking with hotel staff, and trying to solve what appeared to be a catastrophic wedding day disaster. "We can fix this," Anna said, pulling out her phone. "I'll call every bridal shop in the city, Someone must have something in your size. There's no time, I said, looking at my watch. The ceremony starts in 2 hours. Guests are already arriving. Emma, you can't walk down the aisle in that dress, my cousin Maria said, staring at the obvious fake with horror. It looks like it came from a costume shop. What choice do I have? I replied, projecting calm acceptance while internally celebrating how perfectly everything was playing out. The important thing is marrying Tyler. Everything else is just details. My bridesmaids exchanged concerned glances. They could see that I was putting on a brave face, but they also knew how much my real dress had meant to me. The injustice of the situation was obvious to everyone in the room. Should we tell Tyler? Anna asked. Maybe he can talk to his mother, figure out what happened. No, I said firmly. I don't want him to worry about this on our wedding day. We'll sort it out after the honeymoon. But even as I spoke, I was watching my phone as the first photos of me in the fake dress began uploading to social media. Jackson was already on site, documenting the disaster from multiple angles, and several guests had begun sharing behind-the-scenes photos with captions like, "Something's wrong with the bride's dress," and "Wedding day disaster in progress." At 12:30, Tyler knocked on the bridal suite door. "Emma, I know I'm not supposed to see you before the ceremony, but my mother said there might be some kind of problem with your dress." Of course, Diane had told him. She wanted to be there for his reaction, to position herself as the helpful mother-in-law trying to solve a crisis that she had secretly created. "Everything's fine," I called through the door. "Just a small mix-up with the delivery. Nothing to worry about." "Are you sure?" Mom seemed really concerned. She said she'd be happy to help find a solution. I almost laughed out loud. Diane's fake concern was so perfectly predictable. She had created the problem and was now offering to solve it, probably with another cheap dress that would be only marginally better than the one she had substituted. "Tell your mother I appreciate her concern, but everything is under control." An hour before the ceremony, Diane herself appeared at the bridal suite door, accompanied by what appeared to be a new dress bag. "Emma, darling," she called through the door. "I heard there might be some confusion with your dress. I've brought a backup option, just in case. It's a family heirloom that's been worn by 3 generations of Blackwood brides." My bridesmaids looked at me expectantly. Here was a potential solution to the crisis, offered by the mother of the groom herself. It would have been the perfect save if any of us had believed it was genuine. "That's very thoughtful," I called back, "but I'm happy with the dress I have." "Anna, are you sure? I'd be happy to take a look at what you're working with. Maybe there's something we can adjust or improve." The offer to improve my dress was particularly insulting, considering that she was the one who had destroyed it in the first place. But I maintained my gracious tone. "I'm fine, Mrs. Blackwood. Thank you for thinking of me." I could hear her whispering to someone in the hallway, probably Tyler, who was likely confused about why I wouldn't accept his mother's help with what appeared to be a genuine crisis. 30 minutes before the ceremony, I got dressed in Diane's chosen humiliation outfit. The cheap fabric felt rough against my skin. The poorly sewn beadwork caught on my undergarments, and the fit was obviously wrong in multiple places. It was exactly the disaster she had intended it to be. But as I looked at myself in the mirror, surrounded by my horrified bridesmaids, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Every photo that would be taken in the next few hours would document Diane's cruelty and my grace under pressure. The contrast would be stark and undeniable. "Emma, you look..." Anna struggled to find appropriate words. "I look like someone tried to sabotage my wedding and failed," I said calmly. "Because the dress doesn't make the bride makes the dress." It was exactly the kind of quote that would go viral alongside the photos, positioning me as the gracious victim of someone else's petty cruelty. Jackson appeared at the door for pre-ceremony photos, his professional expression carefully neutral, even though he could clearly see the disaster unfolding. "Mrs. Blackwood-to-be," he said formally, "you look radiant. Shall we proceed with the formal portraits?" "Let's do it," I said, lifting my chin and straightening my shoulders. I want to remember every moment of this day. The photos he took in the next 15 minutes would become some of the most shared wedding images in internet history. They captured a bride maintaining perfect dignity despite obvious humiliation, smiling serenely while wearing a dress that was clearly wrong for the occasion. But they also captured something else, the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. As we prepared to walk to the ceremony, my phone buzzed with a message from the social media management app I had set up weeks earlier. Phase 1 post scheduled and ready for deployment immediately following ceremony. I looked around the bridal suite one last time, at my bridesmaids' worried faces, at the evidence of Diane's sabotage, at the beginning of what would either be the most embarrassing day of my life or the most satisfying revenge I had ever executed. Either way, Diane Blackwood was about to learn what happened when you underestimated a girl who grew up fighting for everything she ever got. The ceremony was about to begin, and with it, the most public reckoning she had ever faced. The walk down the aisle felt like a movie scene playing in slow motion. I could hear the collective intake of breath as 300 guests registered that something was very wrong with my dress. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phones appeared in hands, and a ripple of shock moved through the assembled crowd like a wave. But I kept my eyes focused on Tyler, who stood at the altar looking increasingly horrified as I approached. Behind him, I could see the wedding party's confused expressions, the photographer capturing every moment. And in the front row, Diane wearing an expression of perfectly performed concern. She had positioned herself to look like the sympathetic mother-in-law, witnessing a bride's unfortunate wardrobe malfunction. But I could see the satisfied gleam in her eyes. She thought she had successfully humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered in Tyler's social circle. "Emma," Tyler whispered as I reached the altar. "What happened to your dress?" "Your mother wanted to surprise me with something more suitable for a Blackwood bride," I replied quietly, just loud enough for the microphones to pick up. I thought it was so thoughtful of her to take such an interest in my appearance. I watched Tyler's face as the implications hit him. His mother had been involved in whatever had happened to my dress. His eyes flicked to Diane, then back to me, processing the carefully neutral tone in which I had delivered what was essentially an accusation. The officiant, clearly sensing the tension, tried to proceed with the ceremony as if nothing unusual was happening. But the atmosphere in the cathedral had shifted dramatically. What should have been a joyful celebration felt more like the scene of a crime, with everyone waiting to see what would happen next. As we exchanged vows, I could hear the quiet buzz of conversation behind us, the soft clicks of phone cameras, and the barely suppressed whispers of guests trying to figure out what they were witnessing. "Emma," Tyler said when it was his turn to speak, "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by you no matter what challenges we face together." The irony was perfect. He was promising to protect me just hours after his mother had executed the most public humiliation she could devise. The wedding guests were witnessing Tyler make vows he had already failed to keep. "Tyler," I replied, "I promise to love you, support you, and always be honest with you about what really matters in life." My vows were deliberately loaded with meaning that only I fully understood. Honesty about what really matters, like family members who sabotage weddings, manipulate situations, and smile while they destroy other people's happiness. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause was polite but uncertain. The guests were clearly confused about whether they had just witnessed a beautiful wedding or a social disaster. The photography session that followed was surreal. Jackson capturing shots of a couple who appeared to be hiding major relationship drama behind forced smiles. "Emma, Tyler," Jackson said as he posed us for formal shots, "try to look like you're celebrating the happiest day of your lives." "This is the happiest day of my life," I said clearly, making sure my voice carried to the gathered family members. "Everything is exactly as it should be." Tyler squeezed my hand, probably trying to offer comfort for what he assumed was my devastation. He had no idea that I was completely in control of the situation, that every moment was unfolding according to my plan. The reception line was where Diane's plan began to backfire spectacularly. Guest after guest approached us with poorly concealed shock, offering sympathy that was clearly directed at me and suspicion that was increasingly focused on the Blackwood family. "Emma, dear, you look lovely," Tyler's Aunt Catherine said, though her eyes clearly conveyed the opposite message. "What an interesting choice for a wedding dress." "Thank you," I replied graciously. It was actually chosen specifically for me by Tyler's mother. She wanted to make sure I looked appropriate for a Blackwood wedding. Catherine's expression shifted as she processed this information. She turned to look at Diane, who was still maintaining her facade of innocent concern, then back at me with new understanding dawning in her eyes. "How thoughtful of Diane," Catherine said slowly, her tone suggesting it was anything but thoughtful. Each conversation in the reception line followed a similar pattern. Guests expressing confusion about my dress, me graciously crediting Diane with the choice, and growing suspicion about what had really happened. By the time we reached the reception hall, word was spreading that Tyler's mother had somehow been involved in what was clearly a wedding dress disaster. The cocktail hour was when social media truly exploded. Guests began posting photos with captions that ranged from confused to outraged. "Something weird is happening at this wedding. The bride's dress looks like a knockoff, and the mother-in-law seems way too happy about it. I've never seen anything like this. Poor bride looks like she's been sabotaged on her own wedding day. Anyone else think Tyler's mom had something to do with this dress situation? She's been smiling like she won a prize all day." I excused myself to the ladies' room to check my phone and was amazed at how quickly the story was spreading. The hashtag Blackwood wedding drama was already trending locally, and several wedding blogger accounts had picked up the story and begun sharing theories about what had happened. But the real explosion came when I activated phase 2 of my plan. At exactly 6 p.m., as the reception dinner was being served, my pre-scheduled social media posts went live across all platforms. The posts included security camera footage of Diane breaking into the bridal suite, photos comparing my real dress to the fake one she had substituted, and a detailed timeline of her manipulative behavior over the past 2 years. The caption read, "Some people asked why I looked so calm about my wedding dress disaster today. Here's the real story behind what happened and why I wasn't surprised." Within minutes, my phone was exploding with notifications as the posts were shared hundreds, then thousands of times. The security footage was particularly damning. Clear video of Diane sneaking into the bridal suite with obvious premeditation, carefully switching out my dress while wearing an expression of pure satisfaction. I returned to the reception hall to find chaos beginning to unfold. Guests were pulling out their phones, sharing the videos, and staring at Diane with expressions of shock and disgust. The woman who had orchestrated my humiliation was about to become the most hated mother-in-law on the internet. Tyler found me immediately. "Emma, what the hell is going on? People are showing me videos of my mother in your bridal suite. They're saying she sabotaged your dress." "She did sabotage my dress," I said calmly. "Just like she's been sabotaging our relationship since the day we met. The only difference is that this time, I documented it." "You documented it? You mean you knew this was going to happen?" "I knew your mother was planning something to humiliate me at our wedding. I just made sure that when she did it, everyone would see exactly who she really is." Tyler stared at me with a mixture of admiration and horror. "Emma, you set up cameras? You planned this whole thing?" "I planned to protect myself from your mother's cruelty. I just happened to be very thorough about it." Across the room, I could see Diane surrounded by increasingly hostile family members, all holding phones, showing the viral videos of her breaking onto my bridal suite. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time as people realized they had witnessed the execution of a premeditated plan to humiliate her new daughter-in-law. "Mrs. Blackwood," I heard Tyler's Uncle Frank say loudly enough for half the room to hear, "I think you owe everyone here an explanation for what we just saw in those videos." There's been some kind of misunderstanding," Diane stammered. looking around desperately for support. Emma's dress was completely inappropriate for a family wedding. I was just trying to help her make a better choice. By breaking into her bridal suite and stealing her wedding dress? Tyler's Aunt Catherine demanded. What kind of help is that? The room fell silent as everyone waited for Diane's response. She looked like a cornered animal, realizing that her victims had somehow turned the tables on her in the most public way possible. Emma was being dramatic about a simple wardrobe substitution, Diane said, her voice getting shriller. I bought her a perfectly lovely dress. She's the one making this into some kind of scandal for attention. It was exactly the wrong thing to say. Everyone in the room had seen the security footage of her sneaking around like a criminal. And everyone could see the obvious quality difference between what I should have been wearing and what she had forced me to wear instead. Mom, Tyler said, his voice carrying across the now silent room, you sabotaged my wife's wedding dress. On our wedding day. In front of 300 people. I was protecting the family reputation, Diane shot back, abandoning all pretense of innocence. That dress was flashy and inappropriate. Emma needed guidance on how to present herself as a Blackwood wife. By humiliating her at her own wedding? By teaching her that actions have consequences, and that marrying into this family means accepting certain standards. The silence that followed was deafening. Diane had just admitted in front of everyone that she had deliberately humiliated me as a lesson about family hierarchy. She had revealed the calculating cruelty behind her actions, while also demonstrating that she felt completely justified in her behavior. Tyler looked at his mother with an expression I had never seen before, complete disgust mixed with betrayal. Mom, you're no longer welcome at our reception. Please leave. Tyler, you can't be serious. I'm your mother. This is our family's event. You chose to make it about teaching my wife a lesson instead of celebrating our marriage. Leave now. Diane looked around the room, searching for allies among the family members and friends who had watched her systematic destruction of her own reputation. She found none. Every face showed varying degrees of shock, disgust, and judgment. Fine, she said, gathering what remained of her dignity. But don't come crying to me when you realize what kind of person you've married. Emma orchestrated this entire situation to make me look bad. Emma documented your cruelty so everyone could see what kind of person you really are, Tyler replied. There's a difference. As Diane made her exit, escorted by hotel security, who had been quietly summoned during the confrontation, the wedding guests began to react to what they had just witnessed. Phones appeared everywhere as people shared updates about the dramatic conclusion to what was already being called the most viral wedding scandal of the year. But instead of sympathy for Diane, the social media reaction was overwhelmingly supportive of me. Comments poured in praising my composure, condemning Diane's behavior, and celebrating what many were calling the most justified wedding revenge in internet history. This bride is a queen for exposing her mother-in-law's sabotage so perfectly. Finally, someone stood up to a manipulative MIL and had the receipts to prove it. The way she stayed calm and gracious while planning the perfect revenge is legendary. Diane Blackwood is about to become the most hated mother-in-law in America. Tyler found me on the terrace outside the reception hall, where I was taking a moment to process what had just happened. The confrontation had gone exactly as I had planned, but seeing Diane's complete humiliation in front of her entire social circle was more intense than I had expected. Emma, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. I should have seen what my mother was doing to you. I should have protected you from her. You couldn't have protected me from something you didn't know was happening, I replied. Diane was very careful to hide her worst behavior when you were around. But you knew. You've been dealing with this alone for 2 years. I wasn't alone. I had friends, I had evidence, and I had a plan. Sometimes that's enough. He pulled me close, and for the first time all day, I felt like we were actually married. Like we were the team facing the world together, instead of 2 people navigating his mother's manipulations. What happens now? He asked. Now we go back to our reception and celebrate our marriage, I said, and we start our life together without anyone trying to sabotage it from the inside. And my mother? Your mother made her choices. She chose to humiliate me instead of welcoming me into the family. She chose manipulation over honesty. She chose cruelty over kindness. The consequences are hers to deal with. When we returned to the reception, the atmosphere had completely changed. Instead of confused sympathy, guests were approaching me with genuine admiration. The story had shifted from bride victimized by dress disaster to brilliant woman exposes manipulative mother-in-law, and everyone wanted to be part of the narrative. Emma, that was the most impressive thing I've ever seen, Tyler's cousin James said as he shook my hand. You handled that whole situation like a master strategist. I just documented the truth, I replied. Everything else was Diane's choice. The rest of the evening proceeded like a normal wedding reception, except that instead of talking about the usual wedding topics, guests were sharing the viral videos and discussing the social media explosion that was continuing to grow around our story. The hashtag #EmmaBlackwoodRevenge was trending nationally, and news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. But the most satisfying moment came during our first dance, when Tyler whispered in my ear, I love that you're strong enough to fight back, and smart enough to win. I love that you're secure enough to be married to someone who won't be manipulated or intimidated, I whispered back. As we danced, surrounded by 300 people who had witnessed both Diane's cruelty and my response to it, I felt a deep sense of peace. The woman who had tried to destroy my dignity had instead destroyed her own reputation. The wedding that was supposed to humiliate me had instead become a celebration of standing up to bullies and refusing to accept mistreatment. My phone continued buzzing with notifications as the story spread across social media platforms, news websites, and celebrity gossip blogs. By morning, the security footage of Diane sabotaging my dress would be seen by millions of people, and her name would be permanently associated with the most public mother-in-law meltdown in internet history. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight was about celebrating the fact that I had turned Diane's weapon against her, protected my marriage from her manipulation, and proven that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone's true character show to the world. As Tyler and I cut the cake, a perfect 5-tier creation that Diane had insisted on to showcase the family's wealth, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. She had planned every detail of this wedding to reflect Blackwood family values. In the end, it had reflected those values perfectly, just not in the way she had intended. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to discover that our story had exploded beyond anything I could have imagined. My phone showed 847 missed calls, 3,247 text messages, and notifications from social media platforms that my accounts had gained over 100,000 followers overnight. Tyler was already awake, scrolling through news websites on his laptop with an expression of amazement mixed with concern. Emma, look at this, he said, turning the screen toward me. We're on the front page of the entertainment section in USA Today. CNN picked up the story. There's a segment about us scheduled for Good Morning America. I looked at the headlines scrolling across his screen. Bride's perfect revenge. Wedding dress sabotage backfires spectacularly. Mother-in-law's wedding day cruelty caught on camera. Goes viral. Security footage shows premeditated wedding dress theft by groom's mother. The wedding revenge that broke the internet. How do you feel about all this attention? Tyler asked carefully. I considered the question while scrolling through hundreds of supportive comments from strangers around the world. Women were sharing their own stories of manipulative mothers-in-law, praising my strategic planning and calling me everything from brilliant to a hero for standing up to family bullies. I feel like people needed to see what Diane did, I said finally. Not just to me, but what this kind of behavior looks like when someone is held accountable for it. My phone rang, showing a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a professional voice introduced herself as a producer from a major morning television show. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm calling to see if you'd be interested in telling your story on national television. We're fascinated by how you handled such a difficult situation, and our viewers would love to hear your perspective. I agreed to consider the interview request, then spent the next hour fielding similar calls from news outlets, talk shows, and documentary producers. The story had apparently touched a nerve with audiences who had their own experiences with family manipulation, and were celebrating seeing someone fight back effectively. The most interesting call came from my lawyer. Emma, this is Harrison Walsh. We met briefly at your wedding reception last night. I specialize in family law and defamation cases, and I wanted to discuss some legal implications of what happened yesterday. What kind of implications? Well, you have a clear case for theft, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and several other civil claims against your mother-in-law. The security footage and social media evidence you've compiled is extraordinarily comprehensive. I hadn't considered pursuing legal action. The public humiliation seemed like sufficient justice. But Harrison explained that there might be broader implications to consider. Mrs. Blackwood, your case has already inspired dozens of other women to come forward with their own stories of wedding sabotage and family manipulation. If you pursue legal action, it could set precedents that protect other people from similar treatment. Tyler looked at me questioningly. We hadn't discussed the possibility of suing his mother, partly because the wedding revenge had been so complete that additional punishment seemed unnecessary. I need to think about it, I told Harrison. The goal was never to destroy Diane financially. I just wanted her behavior to have consequences. Sometimes financial consequences are the only ones that manipulative people understand, he replied. But take your time to decide. The evidence isn't going anywhere. After hanging up, Tyler and I spent the morning reading through social media reactions to our story. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences with difficult in-laws and celebrating what many called the most satisfying wedding revenge ever filmed. But there were also disturbing messages mixed in with the support. Several people had somehow found Diane's personal information and were sending her threatening messages. Others were calling her workplace, demanding that she be fired. A few had even shown up at her house, taking photos and shouting accusations. Emma, I think my mother is getting death threats, Tyler said, showing me a message from his Aunt Catherine. People are calling her a monster and saying she deserves to suffer for what she did to you. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Diane deserved consequences for her actions. But internet vigilante justice could quickly spiral out of control. The goal had been to expose her behavior, not to incite a mob. We need to make a statement, I said, something that condemns her actions but also asks people to stop with the threats and harassment. Tyler nodded gratefully. I was hoping you'd say that. I don't want to defend what she did, but I also don't want her to be physically harmed because of it. We crafted a social media post that struck what we hoped was the right balance. Thank you to everyone who has supported us over the past 24 hours. While we appreciate your outrage over Diane's actions, we ask that you please refrain from threats, harassment, or attempts to contact her directly. Our goal was to expose manipulative behavior, not to incite violence. Justice has been served through accountability, not through intimidation. The post was shared thousands of times and seemed to reduce the most extreme harassment, though Diane's name had already become permanently associated with wedding sabotage in the public consciousness. Around noon, Tyler's father called. Roger Blackwood was a quiet man who had spent 30 years married to Diane's dramatic manipulation, and this was the first time he had ever directly addressed her behavior. Tyler, I owe Emma an apology, he said. I knew your mother was planning something for the wedding. She's been talking for weeks about teaching Emma proper standards for Blackwood wives. I should have warned you. Dad, why didn't you stop her? There was a long pause before Roger answered. Because I stopped fighting your mother's battles 20 years ago. It was easier to let her do what she wanted than to deal with the consequences of opposing her. Even when what she wanted was to humiliate my wife, I fought. I hoped she would just make some small changes that wouldn't matter in the long run. I never imagined she would go as far as she did. Tyler looked at me while his father spoke. his expression showing a growing understanding of how long his family had been enabling Diane's manipulative behavior. I could see him processing the realization that his mother's cruelty wasn't new. It was just the first time anyone had documented it and fought back. "Dad, where is Mom now? She's locked herself in the bedroom and won't come out. She keeps saying that Emma is a manipulative liar who orchestrated the whole thing to make her look bad." "She did orchestrate it," Tyler said firmly, "because Mom was planning to humiliate her, and Emma was smart enough to turn it around." After the call ended, Tyler sat quietly for several minutes, apparently processing everything he had learned about his family dynamics over the past 24 hours. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest." "Okay. How long have you been dealing with my mother's manipulation? Not just the wedding dress, everything." I had been dreading this conversation, but also looking forward to finally being completely honest about my experience with his family. "Since the first time I met her," I said. "The comments about my background, my education, my career, my appearance. It's been constant for 2 years, but it was always done in a way that made me look oversensitive if I complained about it. Give me examples." I pulled out my phone and showed him the folder where I had been documenting Diane's behavior for months. Screenshots of social media posts where she subtly insulted me, recordings of phone calls where she made backhanded comments, photos of gifts that were clearly designed to be insulting. "She gave me a cookbook for Christmas called Simple Meals for Beginning Cooks," I said, scrolling through the evidence. "She told everyone it was because she wanted to help me learn to cook for you properly." "Emma, why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because you love your mother, and because she was very careful to make it look like I was imagining things or being too sensitive. Every time I tried to explain how her comments made me feel, she would act innocent, and you would end up defending her." Tyler spent an hour looking through my documentation, his expression growing more horrified with each example of his mother's subtle cruelty. By the time he finished, he looked like someone who was seeing his family clearly for the first time. "I failed you," he said simply. "I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you from her." "You couldn't protect me from something you didn't recognize as abuse," I replied. "Diane has had 30 years to perfect her manipulation techniques. She's very good at what she does. She was very good at what she did. After yesterday, I don't think anyone will fall for her innocent act again." That afternoon, we received a visitor that neither of us had expected. Tyler's Aunt Catherine arrived at our hotel, carrying a large garment bag and wearing an expression of determined purpose. "Emma, dear, I brought you something," she said, unzipping the bag to reveal my actual wedding dress, the vintage Vera Wang that I had hidden at Chloe's apartment. "Catherine, how did you—" "Your friend Chloe contacted me this morning. She thought you might want to have some proper wedding photos taken now that all the drama is over." I stared at my real dress, remembering how beautiful I had felt when I first tried it on, how much it had meant to me, and how violated I had felt when Diane tried to replace it with her cheap substitution. "Would you like to put it on?" Catherine asked gently. "We could take some photos in the hotel garden. Just for yourselves, not for social media or publicity." The idea was appealing. All of my wedding photos showed me in Diane's deliberately chosen humiliation outfit. It would be nice to have at least a few images of how the day was supposed to look. "Yes," I said, "I'd like that very much." As I changed into my real wedding dress, I felt a sense of completion that had been missing from the actual ceremony. This was how I had imagined myself on my wedding day: elegant, confident, and beautiful in a dress that reflected my personal style rather than someone else's attempt to diminish me. Tyler's reaction when he saw me in the proper dress was everything I had hoped for during our actual wedding. His eyes widened, his face lit up with genuine joy, and for a moment, I could see what our wedding day would have looked like if Diane hadn't tried to sabotage it. "Emma, you look incredible," he said, taking my hands. "This is how you were supposed to look yesterday." "Yesterday, I looked exactly like I was supposed to look," I corrected. I looked like someone who refuses to be intimidated by bullies, even when they try to humiliate me on the most important day of my life. Catherine photographed us with her professional camera, capturing the joy and love that had been overshadowed by Diane's drama during the actual ceremony. These photos would be for us, proof that our marriage was based on something deeper than the family politics that had tried to destroy it. As we posed for pictures in the hotel garden, Tyler made a decision that surprised me. "Emma, I want to go no contact with my mother until she acknowledges what she did and apologizes to you genuinely." "Tyler, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. What she did wasn't just cruel to you. It was an attack on our marriage. She tried to humiliate my wife in front of our friends and family. That's unforgivable until she makes it right. What if she never apologizes? Then she'll have chosen her pride over her relationship with her son. That's her decision to make." As the sun set behind us and Catherine captured our last few photos, I reflected on how completely the tables had turned in just 24 hours. Diane had planned to humiliate me and establish her dominance over our marriage. Instead, she had exposed her own cruelty to the world and lost her relationship with her son. The wedding dress sabotage that was supposed to mark the beginning of years of manipulation had instead become the end of her ability to interfere in our relationship. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planning something elaborate. It's simply giving someone enough rope to hang themselves and making sure there are cameras rolling when they do it. 2 weeks after the wedding, Tyler and I were settling into our new apartment when we received an unexpected call from Diane's lawyer. She was requesting a meeting to discuss what she called damage control and family reconciliation. "Mrs. Blackwood," the lawyer said, "my client is prepared to make a public apology for her actions at your wedding, in exchange for your agreement to stop pursuing any legal action and to request that social media platforms remove the most damaging content." I looked at Tyler, who was listening on speakerphone with an expression of disgust. The idea that his mother thought she could negotiate her way out of consequences was both predictable and infuriating. "What kind of public apology?" I asked. "A statement acknowledging that her actions were inappropriate and expressing regret for any embarrassment caused to your family." "That's not an apology," Tyler said. "That's a legal non-admission that admits no wrongdoing and accepts no responsibility. Mr. Blackwood, your mother is trying to find a way to repair the family relationship while also protecting herself from further legal exposure. She should have thought about legal exposure before she broke into Emma's bridal suite and stole her wedding dress," Tyler replied. I had been thinking about Harrison Walsh's advice regarding legal action, and the lawyer's call helped clarify my feelings about pursuing formal consequences. "Tell Diane that I'm not interested in negotiating," I said. "She made her choices, and now she can live with the results. If she wants to apologize genuinely, she can do that without conditions or legal protection. If she wants to keep playing games, she can deal with the lawsuit." After hanging up, Tyler put his arms around me. "Are you sure you want to go through with suing her? It's going to be messy and public." "I'm sure. Not because I want to hurt her, but because other people need to see that this kind of behavior has real consequences. How many other women are dealing with manipulative in-laws who think they can get away with anything?" That afternoon, I called Harrison Walsh and formally retained him to pursue civil action against Diane for theft, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with contractual relations. The case would be straightforward. We had video evidence of the theft, documented patterns of manipulative behavior, and clear financial damages from the dress replacement and wedding disruption. But more importantly, it would send a message that family relationships didn't exempt people from accountability for deliberate cruelty. The news of the lawsuit broke 3 days later, generating another wave of social media attention and news coverage. The story had evolved from viral wedding drama to a broader discussion about family manipulation, accountability, and the legal remedies available to victims of deliberate emotional abuse. Bride sues mother-in-law for wedding dress theft and emotional abuse. Legal precedent. Can family members be held liable for emotional manipulation? The wedding revenge that became a civil rights case. The most significant development came when other women began reaching out to Harrison's law firm, wanting to pursue similar cases against family members who had engaged in systematic manipulation and emotional abuse. My case was apparently inspiring a broader movement of people refusing to tolerate mistreatment just because it came from relatives. Emma, you've started something bigger than just your personal situation, Harrison told me during one of our case preparation meetings. We're getting calls from across the country, from people who want to hold their own manipulative family members accountable. What kinds of cases? Mothers-in-law who sabotaged pregnancies by spreading false medical information. Sisters who destroyed wedding planning by sending fake cancellation notices to vendors. Parents who used emotional manipulation to control adult children's financial and relationship decisions. Your case has given people a framework for fighting back legally. I felt a complex mix of satisfaction and responsibility. My personal battle with Diane had apparently opened a door for other people to seek justice for similar mistreatment. But it also meant that our lawsuit would be watched closely as a potential precedent for family accountability cases. Meanwhile, Diane's reputation continued to deteriorate as more details about her manipulative behavior emerged. Tyler's cousins began sharing their own stories about her treatment of their girlfriends and wives over the years. Former neighbors posted about her campaigns of neighborhood social manipulation. Even some of her longtime friends began distancing themselves from someone who had become synonymous with family toxicity. The most damaging revelation came from Tyler's father, who finally decided to speak publicly about 30 years of marriage to a manipulative spouse. I want people to understand that what Emma documented at their wedding wasn't unusual behavior for Diane, Roger said in an interview with a local news station. She's been using these same tactics against family members, neighbors, and anyone else she perceived as a threat to her control for decades. Why are you speaking out now? The reporter asked. Because watching Emma refuse to accept Diane's abuse made me realize how much I've enabled it over the years. I stayed quiet to keep the peace, but that just allowed her to hurt more people. Roger's interview was particularly devastating because it came from someone who had lived with Diane's manipulation intimately and could provide specific examples spanning decades. His confirmation that the wedding sabotage was part of a long pattern of abusive behavior demolished any remaining sympathy she might have had. Tyler was initially uncomfortable with his father's public statements, but eventually came to see them as necessary for breaking the family's culture of enabling toxic behavior. Dad spent 30 years protecting Mom from the consequences of her actions, he told me after we watched the interview together. Maybe if someone had held her accountable earlier, she never would have escalated to wedding sabotage. 6 weeks after the wedding, Diane made a final attempt to regain control of the narrative by giving her own television interview. It was a spectacular miscalculation that only reinforced why she had become the most hated mother-in-law in America. I want people to understand that I was trying to help Emma make appropriate choices for a family wedding, she told the interviewer. The dress she selected was very flashy and attention-seeking. I thought a more conservative option would be more suitable. Mrs. Blackwood, you broke into her bridal suite and stole her wedding dress. How do you justify that behavior? I didn't steal anything. I provided an alternative option because Emma was clearly not thinking clearly about appropriate wedding attire. Did you ask her permission before making this substitution? Sometimes, family members need to make difficult decisions for the good of everyone involved. The interview was so tone-deaf and self-incriminating that it generated another round of viral outrage. Diane apparently believed that she could explain her actions in a way that would make people sympathetic to her position. Instead, she came across as someone who was completely unable to acknowledge wrongdoing or accept responsibility for her actions. She actually thinks she was helping me, I said to Tyler as we watched clips of the interview trending on social media. She genuinely believes that humiliating me was justified because she didn't like my dress. That's what scares me the most, Tyler replied. She's so convinced of her own righteousness that she can't even see how evil her behavior was. The interview also provided additional evidence for our lawsuit, as Diane had essentially confessed to the theft while trying to justify it. Harrison was delighted with what he called the most self-incriminating defendant statement he had ever seen. But the most satisfying response to Diane's interview came from an unexpected source. The designer of my actual wedding dress, who had been following the story, released her own statement about the situation. Vera Wang designs are created for women who want to look elegant and sophisticated on their wedding day, the statement read. Mrs. Torres chose a classic, timeless design that was perfect for her. Mrs. Blackwood's description of this dress as flashy and attention-seeking reveals her own poor understanding of appropriate bridal fashion. Having Vera Wang herself essentially call Diane's taste into question was the perfect finishing touch to a story that had already humiliated her beyond repair. As we prepared for the trial, Tyler and I reflected on how much our relationship had strengthened through the process of standing up to his mother's manipulation together. The wedding dress sabotage that was supposed to divide us had instead revealed that we were capable of facing challenges as a united team. Emma, I need to thank you for something, Tyler said one evening as we reviewed legal documents together. For what? For being strong enough to fight back against my mother, and for documenting everything so thoroughly that I couldn't ignore what she was doing to you. I didn't do it for you. I did it because I wasn't going to let her destroy my dignity without consequences. I know, and that's what makes it even more impressive. You didn't need me to save you. You saved yourself and showed me who my mother really was in the process. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later, but the real victory had already been achieved. Diane's reputation was permanently destroyed. Her relationship with her son was over, and her attempt to establish dominance over our marriage had backfired so completely that she had lost all influence over our lives. Most importantly, my refusal to accept her abuse had inspired dozens of other people to seek legal recourse for similar mistreatment. The wedding dress sabotage that was supposed to be my humiliation had become a catalyst for holding manipulative family members accountable nationwide. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just fighting back. It's fighting back so effectively that you inspire other people to stop accepting mistreatment too. Diane had tried to make me an example of what happened to women who didn't submit to her authority. Instead, I had made her an example of what happened to bullies who finally picked the wrong target. The trial began on a crisp October morning, 3 months after the wedding that had destroyed Diane Blackwood's reputation, and launched a national conversation about family accountability. The courthouse was surrounded by news vans and protesters holding signs reading, "Justice for Emma" and "Stop Family Abuse." Harrison Walsh had warned me that the trial would attract significant attention, but I was unprepared for the circus atmosphere outside the courthouse. Our story had apparently resonated with so many people that supporters had traveled from other states to witness what they called a landmark case in family justice. Mrs. Blackwood. A reporter called out as Tyler and I walked through the crowd. How do you feel about becoming the face of the movement against manipulative in-laws? I feel like people deserve to have their dignity protected, even within family relationships, I replied. Nobody should have to tolerate abuse just because it comes from a relative. Inside the courtroom, I was surprised to see how many women had come to observe the proceedings. The gallery was packed with faces I didn't recognize. Apparently, people who had followed our story online and wanted to see how legal accountability for family manipulation would play out. Diane sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. The past 3 months had clearly taken a toll. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, and she avoided making eye contact with anyone in the courtroom. Her lawyer looked like someone who wished he had never taken this case. Your Honor, Harrison began in his opening statement, this case is about more than a wedding dress. It's about the deliberate, premeditated humiliation of a young woman by someone who was supposed to welcome her into the family. He walked the jury through the evidence methodically. The security footage of Diane breaking into the bridal suite, the documentation of her manipulative behavior over 2 years, the financial damages from the dress replacement, and the emotional trauma of being humiliated in front of hundreds of people. The defendant's own words and actions prove that this was not a misunderstanding or a well-intentioned mistake, Harrison continued. This was calculated psychological abuse designed to establish dominance and control over the plaintiff's marriage. Diane's lawyer, struggling to find a defensible position, argued that family members had a right to express concerns about wedding appropriateness, and that the dress substitution was intended as helpful guidance rather than sabotage. Mrs. Blackwood was trying to help her daughter-in-law make choices that would reflect well on the family's social standing. He said, "Her methods may have been misguided, but her intentions were not malicious." It was exactly the wrong argument to make in front of a jury that had watched Diane's self-incriminating television interview and seen the security footage of her sneaking around like a criminal. The first day of testimony established the basic facts of the case, which were largely undisputed. Diane had indeed switched my wedding dress without permission, causing financial damages and emotional distress. The question was whether this constituted actionable legal wrongdoing or merely unfortunate family conflict. The second day focused on the pattern of manipulative behavior that had led up to the wedding sabotage. Harrison called several witnesses who testified about Diane's treatment of other family members over the years. Tyler's cousin Beth described how Diane had sabotaged her engagement party by calling vendors to cancel services and then acting innocent when everything fell apart. Tyler's former girlfriend Maria testified about psychological manipulation designed to drive her away from the family. Even Roger took the stand to describe 30 years of emotional manipulation and control. Mr. Blackwood, Harrison asked Tyler's father, "In your 30 years of marriage to the defendant, how many times did you see her take responsibility for hurting someone else's feelings?" Roger was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Never. She always found a way to make it the other person's fault." "And in your opinion, was the wedding dress substitution consistent with her usual patterns of behavior?" "It was exactly what I expected her to do," Roger said quietly. "She had been talking for weeks about teaching Emma her place in the family hierarchy. This was just her most public demonstration of control. The most powerful testimony came on the third day, when I took the stand to describe 2 years of systematic psychological manipulation. Harrison had prepared me carefully for this moment, coaching me to present the facts calmly and let the evidence speak for itself. "Mrs. Blackwood," Harrison began, "can you describe your relationship with the defendant prior to your wedding day?" "Diane made it clear from our first meeting that she considered me unsuitable for her son," I said, looking directly at the jury. "She spent 2 years trying to undermine my confidence, criticize my choices, and establish that I would always be subordinate to her authority in Tyler's life. Can you give specific examples?" I walked through the documented incidents, the insulting gifts, the backhanded compliments, the social media posts designed to embarrass me, the systematic exclusion from family events. Each example was supported by evidence that Harrison projected on screens for the jury to see. "Mrs. Blackwood, why did you begin documenting these incidents?" "Because I realized that Diane was very skilled at making her abuse seem like concern or helpfulness. I needed proof that what I was experiencing was real and deliberate." "Did you anticipate that she would sabotage your wedding dress?" "I knew she was planning something to humiliate me at the wedding. She had been making comments about my dress being inappropriate for weeks. When I discovered text messages between her and Tyler discussing wardrobe changes, I realized I needed to protect myself." Harrison showed the jury the security footage of Diane breaking into the bridal suite, which still looked shocking, even months after the incident. Several jury members appeared visibly disturbed by watching someone sneak around to sabotage a bride's wedding dress. "How did you feel when you discovered the dress substitution on your wedding morning?" "Violated, humiliated, but also vindicated, because it proved that everything I had documented about her behavior was true." During cross-examination, Diane's lawyer tried to paint me as manipulative and calculating, someone who had orchestrated the entire situation to make his client look bad. Mrs. Blackwood, isn't it true that you set up cameras specifically to entrap my client? I set up cameras to document what I suspected was going to happen. Your client chose to break into my bridal suite and steal my wedding dress. Nobody forced her to do that. But you admit that you planned this entire scenario to embarrass Mrs. Diane Blackwood? I planned to protect myself from her sabotage and make sure that if she tried to humiliate me, everyone would see exactly what she was doing. The embarrassment was entirely of her own making. The lawyer's strategy of making me appear calculating backfired completely. The jury seemed impressed by my foresight and preparation rather than disturbed by it. In their view, I was a young woman who had protected herself from an older, more powerful bully using intelligence and documentation. On the fourth day, Diane finally took the stand in her own defense. It was a disaster from the moment she was sworn in. Mrs. Blackwood, her lawyer began carefully. Can you explain your actions on the night before your son's wedding? I was trying to help Emma make better choices, Diane said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. The dress she had chosen was completely inappropriate for a family wedding. It was flashy and attention-seeking. Did you have permission to enter the bridal suite? I didn't think I needed permission to help my daughter-in-law make appropriate decisions for our family's wedding. Harrison's cross-examination was methodical and devastating. He walked Diane through each documented incident of manipulation, forcing her to either deny clear evidence or admit to deliberately cruel behavior. Mrs. Blackwood, you gave the plaintiff a cookbook titled Simple Meals for Beginning Cooks as a Christmas gift. Can you explain the message you were trying to send? I was trying to help her learn to cook properly for Tyler. Even though she had been cooking for herself since age 16 and had worked in restaurant kitchens during college, I wanted to help her understand our family's expectations for wives. So, you were teaching her that her previous cooking experience was inadequate? I was providing guidance on appropriate standards. With each answer, Diane revealed more about her controlling mindset and her belief that she had the right to remake other people according to her standards. The jury watched her testimony with expressions ranging from disbelief to disgust. The most damaging moment came when Harrison showed her the security footage of the dress substitution. Mrs. Blackwood, can you explain why you chose to make this substitution secretly, at night, without the bride's knowledge or consent? I thought it would be easier if she didn't have to worry about making the right choice. So you decided that lying to her and stealing her wedding dress was easier than having an honest conversation? I was protecting the family's reputation. By humiliating your son's wife in front of 300 people? Diane had no good answer for that question, and her silence spoke volumes to the jury. The closing arguments took place on Friday afternoon. Harrison summarized the evidence clearly and passionately, arguing that family relationships did not exempt people from accountability for deliberate cruelty. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant wants you to believe that this case is about family disagreements and wedding planning conflicts. But the evidence shows something much more serious: systematic psychological abuse, culminating in a calculated act of theft and humiliation. He pointed to the screen showing Diane sneaking into the bridal suite. This is not the behavior of someone trying to help. This is the behavior of someone trying to harm. The plaintiff trusted this woman to welcome her into the family, and instead, she was targeted for destruction. Diane's lawyer made a final, desperate argument that the case represented government interference in family relationships and that wedding conflicts should be resolved privately, rather than in courtrooms. If we hold family members legally liable for every hurt feeling and misunderstanding, we'll destroy the fabric of family relationships, he argued. Mrs. Diane Blackwood made a mistake, but it was a family mistake that should be forgiven, not prosecuted. It was exactly the wrong message to send to a jury that had spent 4 days watching evidence of deliberate, systematic abuse disguised as family concern. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a verdict that exceeded even my hopes for justice. "We find for the plaintiff on all counts," the jury foreman announced. "We award $50,000 in compensatory damages for the cost of the dress replacement and wedding disruption, $200,000 in punitive damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, and $100,000 in additional punitive damages for the deliberate nature of the defendant's actions." The courtroom erupted in applause from the gallery full of supporters who had followed our story. Tyler squeezed my hand as we listened to the verdict that would not only compensate me for Diane's abuse, but send a message that manipulative family behavior had serious legal consequences. But the monetary award was less important than the precedent that had been established. Family members could now be held legally accountable for systematic emotional abuse, and victims had a clear pathway for seeking justice when manipulation and control crossed the line into actionable harm. As we left the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and supporters, I felt a deep sense of completion. The woman who had tried to humiliate me into submission had instead lost her reputation, her relationship with her son, and a significant amount of money. More importantly, she had become a cautionary tale about what happened when manipulative behavior finally faced real consequences. "Mrs. Blackwood," a reporter called out, "what message do you hope this verdict sends to other people dealing with manipulative family members?" "That you don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from relatives," I replied. "Document everything, stand up for yourself, and don't let anyone convince you that keeping the peace is more important than protecting your dignity." The legal victory was satisfying, but the real triumph was broader than any courtroom could provide. Over the past 6 months, I had inspired hundreds of people to seek help for family manipulation, encouraged victims to document abuse, and helped establish legal precedents for holding toxic relatives accountable. Diane Blackwood had tried to break me down and establish her dominance over my marriage. Instead, she had accidentally launched a movement that would protect countless other people from similar mistreatment. Sometimes the most perfect revenge is simply giving a bully enough rope to hang themselves and making sure the world is watching when they do it. 6 months after the trial, Tyler and I were featured on the cover of Modern Family magazine in an article titled "The Couple Who Changed Family Law." The story detailed how our case had inspired new legislation in 12 states, providing legal remedies for family manipulation and emotional abuse. "Blackwood," the interviewer had asked, "did you ever imagine that your wedding dress sabotage would become a catalyst for nationwide legal reform?" "I never imagined any of this," I had replied honestly. "I just wanted to make sure that Diane's behavior had consequences. Everything else grew from that simple desire for accountability." The magazine was sitting on our coffee table as Tyler and I packed for our first anniversary trip to Italy, the honeymoon we had postponed while dealing with the legal aftermath of Diane's sabotage. The past year had been a whirlwind of interviews, speaking engagements, and legal consultations, but we were finally ready to focus on our marriage rather than his mother's crimes. "Emma," Tyler said, folding clothes into his suitcase, "I got a letter from my mother yesterday." I looked up, surprised. Diane had made no contact with either of us since the trial, and we had assumed she was too humiliated to attempt any kind of reconciliation. "What did she say?" Tyler handed me a single sheet of stationery with Diane's careful handwriting. "Tyler, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you that I've been in therapy since the trial ended. My therapist has helped me understand that my behavior toward Emma was abusive and inexcusable. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm working to become a better person. Emma was right to fight back against my manipulation, and I'm grateful that she was strong enough to stop me from continuing to hurt people. I love you, and I hope someday you might be willing to have a relationship with me again. But I understand if that's not possible." Mom, I read the letter twice, searching for signs of the manipulation and self-pity that had characterized all of Diane's previous communications. Instead, I found what appeared to be genuine accountability and acceptance of responsibility. "How do you feel about this?" I asked Tyler. "Confused," he admitted. "Part of me wants to believe she's really changed, but another part of me thinks this might just be another manipulation tactic. What does your therapist say? Tyler had begun seeing a counselor after the trial to process the revelations about his family's dysfunction and his own role in enabling his mother's behavior. She says that real change is possible, but it takes years of consistent behavior to prove it. A letter isn't enough to rebuild trust after decades of manipulation. I handed the letter back to him. What do you want to do? Nothing, for now. If Mom has really changed, she'll continue working on herself whether or not we respond. If she's just trying to manipulate us into forgiveness, she'll get frustrated and reveal her true motivations soon enough. It was a mature response that showed how much Tyler had grown over the past year. The man who had once reflexively defended his mother's behavior now understood that love didn't require accepting abuse, and that forgiveness had to be earned through consistent change rather than demanded as a family obligation. That afternoon, I received a call from Harrison Walsh with news that put Diane's letter in a different context. Emma, I thought you should know that your case has been cited in 17 successful lawsuits against manipulative family members across the country. The legal precedent you established is protecting other people from the same kind of abuse you experienced. What kinds of cases? Mothers-in-law who sabotaged pregnancies? Siblings who destroyed wedding planning? Parents who used financial manipulation to control adult children's relationships? Your documentation methods and legal strategy have become the template for fighting family abuse. The most significant case had been filed in California, where a woman named Patricia Santos had used my approach to successfully sue her mother-in-law for systematically undermining her marriage and mental health. The award had been even larger than mine, $500,000 in total damages for what the jury found to be a deliberate campaign of psychological destruction. Patricia wanted me to thank you specifically, Harrison continued. She said that seeing your case gave her the courage to document her own abuse and seek legal recourse. These calls had become routine over the past 6 months. Women from across the country contacted Harrison's office to discuss pursuing similar cases, and many credited my willingness to fight back publicly with inspiring their own decisions to seek justice. But the most meaningful contact had come from an unexpected source. 3 weeks earlier, I had received a carefully worded email from someone calling herself another survivor. Dear Emma, I wanted you to know that your story saved my life. I had been dealing with manipulation from my ex-husband's family for years, and I was beginning to think I was imagining the abuse because they were so good at making it seem like loving concern. Watching your case play out showed me that gaslighting is a real tactic, that documentation works, and that I didn't have to accept mistreatment just to keep peace with family members. I'm now in therapy. I've gone no contact with my abusers, and I'm rebuilding my sense of self-worth. None of that would have been possible without your example of fighting back effectively. Thank you for being brave enough to expose what family abuse really looks like. Gratefully. Another survivor. The email had affected me more deeply than any news coverage or legal victory. The realization that my personal battle with Diane had helped other people escape similar situations gave meaning to the entire experience that went beyond monetary compensation or public vindication. That evening, Tyler and I attended the wedding of his cousin Beth, the same Beth who had testified about Diane's sabotage of her engagement party years earlier. The ceremony was beautiful, but what struck me most was how different the family dynamic felt without Diane's presence. It's so peaceful, Tyler observed as we watched his cousins laughing together without the undercurrent of tension that had always accompanied family gatherings. I never realized how much emotional energy everyone spent managing Mom's moods and reactions. Beth approached us during the reception, glowing with happiness and gratitude. Emma, I need to thank you again for what you did, she said, embracing me warmly. If you hadn't exposed Diane's behavior so publicly, I probably would have spent years walking on eggshells around her at every family event. How is everyone adjusting to her absence? It's like a weight has been lifted from the entire family. People are more relaxed, more honest, more genuinely affectionate with each other. We didn't realize how much her manipulation was poisoning every interaction. Tyler's father approached us later in the evening, looking healthier and more confident than I had ever seen him. "Emma, I wanted to update you on something," Roger said. "I filed for divorce from Diane last month." Tyler looked shocked. "Dad, you never said anything about that." "I've been working with a therapist since the trial, trying to understand how I enabled Diane's behavior for so many years. One of the things I realized is that staying married to her was just another way of protecting her from consequences. How is she handling the divorce? Badly. She's trying to use the same manipulation tactics that worked for 30 years, but they don't work anymore. Therapy has taught me to recognize her patterns and refuse to engage with them." Roger's decision to leave his marriage was perhaps the most profound consequence of my battle with Diane. The man who had spent decades enabling her abuse had finally found the courage to protect himself and others from her manipulation. As Tyler and I danced at Beth's reception, surrounded by family members who were experiencing genuine peace for the first time in years, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my life had taken since Diane tried to humiliate me with a wedding dress substitution. "Emma," Tyler said as we swayed to the music, "I need to tell you something I've never said before." "What's that?" "I'm grateful that my mother sabotaged your dress." I pulled back to look at him, surprised. "Tyler, that's a terrible thing to be grateful for." "No, hear me out. If she hadn't crossed that line so publicly, I might have spent years watching her manipulate you and our children without ever recognizing what was happening. Her sabotage forced me to see her clearly and choose between enabling her abuse or protecting my marriage." He was right, in a way that was both satisfying and deeply sad. Diane's wedding dress theft had been so obviously wrong that it had shattered the illusion of loving family concern that had protected her manipulative behavior for decades. By overplaying her hand so dramatically, she had accidentally exposed the true nature of her relationship with everyone around her. Sometimes, people have to destroy themselves before others can see who they really are, I said. And sometimes, the people they try to destroy end up stronger than they ever imagined they could be. As we left the reception that night, I thought about the letter Diane had sent and her claims of therapeutic breakthrough and personal growth. Maybe she was genuinely changing, or maybe it was just another manipulation tactic designed to regain access to her son's life. Either way, it didn't matter. I had learned that protecting myself from abuse was more important than giving abusers chances to prove they had changed. Diane had earned her exile through years of deliberate cruelty, and she would have to prove her transformation through actions rather than words, if she ever wanted to be trusted again. The most important lesson I had learned from the entire experience was that refusing to accept mistreatment wasn't cruel or vindictive. It was necessary for maintaining dignity and mental health. Some people would always try to manipulate, control, and diminish others. The only real protection was documentation, boundaries, and the willingness to enforce consequences when those boundaries were crossed. Diane Blackwood had tried to teach me my place in her family hierarchy. Instead, she had taught me the value of fighting back intelligently, documenting everything carefully, and never accepting abuse just to keep the peace. It was the most valuable lesson anyone had ever given me, even if she hadn't intended to teach it. 5 years after the wedding that changed everything, I stood in the courthouse where Diane had been ordered to pay damages for her cruelty. But this time, I was there for a different reason. I was being sworn in as a victims' rights advocate, a position created by new legislation inspired by our case. The Family Accountability Act had been passed in 26 states, providing legal remedies for systematic emotional abuse between family members and establishing support services for victims of familial manipulation. I had been offered the position of coordinating victim services, helping other people navigate the legal and emotional challenges of holding toxic relatives accountable. "Emma Torres Blackwood," the judge said formally, "do you solemnly swear to uphold the duties of victim advocacy with integrity, compassion, and dedication to justice?" I do, I replied, thinking about all the people who had contacted me over the years, seeking advice on documenting abuse, building legal cases, and finding the courage to fight back against manipulative family members. Tyler sat in the gallery with our 18-month-old daughter, Isabella, who was happily babbling and completely unaware that her mother had just officially committed to spending her career protecting other people from the kind of abuse that had nearly destroyed our wedding day. After the ceremony, we walked to the park across from the courthouse, the same park where I had taken my first nervous call from a stranger asking for advice on dealing with a manipulative mother-in-law 3 years earlier. How does it feel to be officially fighting family bullies for a living? Tyler asked as we watched Isabella chase pigeons with unsteady toddler steps. Like everything that happened with your mother was leading to this moment, I replied. Like all that pain and planning and legal drama actually had a purpose beyond just personal justice. We had moved to a different city 2 years earlier, partly for my new job, but mostly to distance ourselves from the lingering social media attention that continued to follow our story. The wedding dress sabotage had become such a famous case study in family manipulation that we still occasionally encountered people who recognized us from news coverage or social media posts. But the distance had also allowed us to build a life that was defined by what we chose to create, rather than what we had survived. Tyler had started his own consulting business. I had completed my graduate degree in family counseling, and we had bought a small house with a garden where Isabella could grow up surrounded by peace rather than drama. "Any word from your mother?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Radio silence for 8 months now," Tyler replied. "Dad thinks she's moved to Florida to live with her sister, but nobody's sure." Diane's letter claiming therapeutic breakthrough had been followed by 18 months of sporadic attempts to rebuild relationships with family members. But her efforts had been inconsistent and manipulative, suggesting that her claimed transformation was more about regaining access than genuine change. The final straw had come when she tried to show up uninvited at Isabella's first birthday party, claiming that grandmothers had automatic rights to see their grandchildren, regardless of past conflicts. Tyler's firm refusal to allow contact until she demonstrated sustained behavioral change had apparently convinced her that her usual tactics would not work. "Do you think she'll ever really change?" Tyler asked. "I think she'll never change enough to be safe around Isabella," I replied. Some people are too committed to their patterns of control to ever develop healthy relationships. It was a sad reality, but one I had learned to accept. Protecting our daughter from manipulation and emotional abuse was more important than maintaining the fiction of family unity with someone who had proven herself incapable of genuine love or respect. My phone buzzed with a text message from Harrison Walsh. "Emma, just wanted you to know that the Santos case in California was decided today. $750,000 verdict for the plaintiff. Your documentation methods helped them win what's now the largest family abuse award in state history." I showed the message to Tyler, who smiled with satisfaction. Patricia Santos was the pharmaceutical researcher, right? The one whose mother-in-law tried to sabotage her pregnancy? That's her. She used the exact same approach I developed for documenting Diane's abuse. Hidden cameras, detailed timelines, preserved communications. It's become the standard template for these cases. How many people have you helped now? Directly? About 40 cases across the country. But the legal precedents have been cited in hundreds of successful actions against manipulative family members. The ripple effects of my battle with Diane had exceeded anything I could have imagined when I first set up cameras in my bridal suite. What had started as a personal quest for justice had become a nationwide movement to hold toxic family members accountable for systematic emotional abuse. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the simplest one. Isabella would grow up in a family where manipulation was not tolerated, where boundaries were respected, and where love was measured by actions rather than words. She would never experience the kind of systematic undermining that I had endured, because we had learned to recognize and stop it before it could take root. "Mama!" Isabella called out, running toward us with a dandelion clutched in her tiny fist. "Flower! That's a beautiful flower, sweetheart," I said, lifting her into my arms. "Did you pick it yourself?" She nodded proudly, then offered the dandelion to Tyler. "Daddy, flower." As Tyler accepted the gift with exaggerated delight, I thought about the different world we were creating for our daughter. She would grow up believing that her choices mattered, that her dignity deserved protection, and that she never had to accept mistreatment from anyone, even family members who claimed to love her. The wedding dress that Diane had stolen and replaced was now displayed in a frame in our home office, alongside newspaper clippings about the legal precedents our case had established. Visitors often asked about the story behind the obviously damaged dress, giving me opportunities to share what I had learned about fighting back against manipulation. The most important thing, I would tell them, is understanding that you don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from relatives. Family relationships should be based on mutual respect, not on one person's right to control and diminish others. As we walked home from the park that evening, Isabella asleep in Tyler's arms and the setting sun painting everything in golden light, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this peaceful moment. Diane Blackwood had tried to destroy my confidence, sabotage my marriage, and establish her dominance over our family. Instead, she had accidentally launched my career in victim advocacy, strengthened my relationship with Tyler, and created legal protections for thousands of other people dealing with similar abuse. The best revenge I had learned wasn't destroying your enemy, it was taking their attack and using it to build something better, stronger, and more protective than what existed before. Sometimes the most profound victories emerge from the deepest betrayals. If you have the courage to fight back and the wisdom to transform pain into purpose. Diane had tried to teach me my place in her hierarchy of control. Instead, she had taught me that no one had the right to diminish another person's dignity, and that fighting back against manipulation wasn't selfish. It was necessary for creating the kind of world we wanted our children to inherit. In the end, her wedding dress sabotage had become the foundation for protecting countless other people from similar cruelty. It was perhaps the most unintentionally generous gift she could have given, though I doubted she would ever see it that way. But as I tucked Isabella into her crib that night, surrounded by the peace and security that we had built from the ashes of family dysfunction, I felt nothing but gratitude for the strength I had discovered when someone tried to break me down. The woman who had attempted to humiliate me into submission had instead taught me that I was capable of fighting back brilliantly, documenting everything thoroughly, and turning personal pain into a movement for justice. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up revealing exactly how strong we really are. And sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't revenge at all. It's building a better world where such betrayals become impossible to sustain.